Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're ready to start in about 1 minute, so please take your seats. Welcome, everybody, to this session on decent work in global supply chain, trends, practical tools, and experiences in the region. My name is Dinah Baswil. I'm with the Asian Institute of Management. So I guess we're a little bit ahead of the bell, but I know. And I teach human capital management at the degree programs for the Asian Institute of Management. That's normally what you would call human resource management, but I prefer to tell my participants in the classroom that it's human capital management because I think that one change in the word actually makes a difference in how they see their people, in that it's not a resource per se, but something that you nurture and grow like capital. So in front of us is a very good panel that's gender diverse and very international. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have a very good discussion for this final session of the day. So let me go ahead and introduce the panel for you before I start with some of my questions. All right. So with us today is, Miss Sarah Gandhi, who's a policy officer at the EU Director General Trade, and she came all the way from Brussels. Next to her is Miss Miwa Yamada, who's a director at the Interdisciplinary Studies Center for JETRO IDE, coming all the way from Japan as well. We have Mr. Xiao Hoi Liang, Deputy Chief Economist for the China National Textile and Apparel Council from China. Ms. Atapan Masrungson, Advisor for the Thai Tuna Industry Association based here in Bangkok. And finally, Mr. Francis Kim Upgi, who's the Director for Social and Economic Policy at ITUCAP from Singapore. So the way we want to run the panels, I will go ahead and pose my first question to the rest of the panel, and then we're going to go ahead and have another round of question, and hopefully in, say, 30 minutes or so, we're going to go ahead and open the floor already for questions, because we really want to hear what everybody has to say with regards to the trends and the kind of experiences you have with how we can incorporate decent work in the global supply chains. So my first question to everybody on the panel is, what are the labor-related problems in your experience from your field of expertise that enterprises encounter in their operations, including their global supply chains? Sarah?
This one? Yes, it's worked. First of all, let me start by thanking you for the opportunity to participate in the panel. As you may know, the EU is supporting the forum, and so we're very happy to be able to participate in these exchanges today on such a key topic. And all the more since we have a gender balance panel, so this is also something we very much welcome. So going straight into the challenges, I think enterprises are facing many challenges when we come to labor practices, and we see that through our different field of work. For instance, ensuring social dialogue and freedom of association, also looking at for instance, fair wages, and there is this wide range of issue. Non-discrimination is also, of course, very important. When we come more, let's say, to process-related challenges, I think one which is very important is that we need to create this mind shift and awareness as government on the fact that actually decent work is not a burden, but is an opportunity.
That's right.
And indeed, this idea is actually gaining traction, but not all actors are fully convinced, while we know that actually decent work can be a driver for business performance and productivity. So that's one important challenge that we are trying to tackle. A second challenge is actually that we need to work in partnerships, and we've heard that throughout the day. And it's beautiful and it's needed, but it's also not easy because we have to overcome a number of challenges to create partnership. I mean, there is administrative burden, we need to come together, we need to overcome differences, and also it requires a great deal of resilience. It takes time. And then, last but not least, I think we also need to develop the tools for implementation of all the standards that we have on decent work and responsible business practices. We have the ILO Amenity Declaration, the OECD guidelines, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. But the key word is really implementation, and we have to help business with developing the set of right tools.
Right. And how about you, Miwa, in your work with Jethro?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I am a researcher at Institute of Developing Economies. Our umbrella organization is Japan External Trade Organization, which promotes Japanese business outside Japan. Recently, we have conducted surveys on 800 Japanese companies operating outside Japan, let's say in ASEAN and Southwest Asia, and also Western Europe, as well as in Africa. And then we found out, okay, today I'd like to introduce major three findings from the survey to show you what the challenges Japanese companies are facing. So the first question is whether you have a corporate social responsibility policies requesting your suppliers to comply. And the answer is almost 30% of the Japanese companies said, yes, we have policies to request their suppliers to follow it. And we also asked the opposite questions. What about, have you ever been asked by your buyers to comply with their policies? And then the answer is more doubled, 53%. So I think that Japanese businesses still have a room to bring their leverage to in terms of have a responsible business supply chain, discrimination and also fair wages and all the things. And among those standards, the Japanese company have a variation of sort of awareness. Yes. So when it comes to the OSH, occupational health and safety, almost 90% of the Japanese companies say that is very important and relevant to our business and also our supply chain as well. But when it comes to the freedom of association, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Japanese companies are opposing, for freedom of association, but just the, level of awareness or, the recognition of importance of this standard. The number is half. 49% of the companies said yes. So, even among the labor standards, when we look at each standard, the level of awareness is different. And second thing is the gap between the region. The companies operating ASEAN and the companies Japanese companies operating in Western Europe, they have, when we look at the percentage of the company which has corporate social responsibility, yeah, we already shared Sarah before. The number in Western Europe is almost, let's say, yes, about 80% of the Japanese companies operating in Western Europe said, yes, we have corporate social responsibility. But in ASEAN, it says almost 55%. So we can see the difference so between the region, even among the same Japanese companies. And also the third one is the gap between large companies and SMEs. Among the large companies, more than 80% of the companies said, yes, we have CSO policies and ask their suppliers to follow. But among the SMEs, only 54% they have a corporate social responsibility policy. So maybe also that there are challenges for SMEs as well.
SMEs as well.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think that's enough for now. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Miwa. How about you, Xiaohui, with regards to the Chinese garment and or textile and apparel industry? What are the challenges that you see?
First, let me thank you for having me here. And I think to answer this question, I would really want to categorize my sector or our sector into two dimensions. One is the domestic dimension, or what is happening in China, and the other one is international or outbound dimension. That is what is happening outside China. So when it comes to internal challenges, and also, of course, sometimes I would not say everything is a challenge. It might be also be opportunity. When it comes to the domestic dimension, I think we have very interesting demographic, situation of workers. Let me start with some figures. We have a direct employment of over 22 million workers all across China. I think that's like half of France population. But along the whole supply chain, I mean the greater sector, we also have an indirect employment of over 100 million workers. So, I mean that's the population of, for instance, Vietnam, so that's why this has made our sector the biggest one in around the globe. Of course, we also have, if you look into the composition of this 20 million and 100 million, I think one very important feature is that there's over 65% of the workforce are women, like the panelist here. Yeah. So I mean that this is an opportunity, but also it's also a challenge because for many companies, they may not be aware of women's rights, and they don't know how to really, invest in women and empower them. So this is one thing I would like to highlight. And when it comes to the quality side of our labor force in China, I think we have some very interesting trends need to be highlighted. One is we have a new generation of workers, okay? And unlike their fathers and parents, this new generation, they are more creative, they are more dynamic and energetic, and they are more aware of their rights, and they are more intended to use legal approaches when something happens. So this has also brought to a change of the domestic industrial relations. Meanwhile, we are also having another interesting change with the aging of working force. Let me tell you that by the year 2016, the average age of our of the national workforce in China has already exceeded 40. So it's like me. Yeah. So the average age is like me. So and yet it's still aging. Yeah. So I mean this has also caused another push for the employers to be more careful of their workers. And in one way, it's a young new generation. Another way, it's a aging new generation. So I think this has a combination of these two factors has made the employers more and more care of their workers. And also, I think it's very important to mention that this new generation of workforce has a very important quality, which is they are much way better educated than their parents. They also have much better skills compared with, for instance, the president's generation. So they have, they have a very good asset. I know some people may not like this expression, but in business terms, they are the best asset for our industry. Let me give you also another figure here. When it comes to the weaving sector, making fabrics, okay, and yarns, our productivity efficiency in an average Chinese mill is like to 5 to 20 times of that in Vietnam. So this is so comparable, and also I think this is a combination of good skilled workers and advanced technology and equipment. So this is also creating new challenges and opportunities for the sector. But let me also put this in a broader scheme. If you look at the whole supply chain, I think we have much greater challenges. I would like to echo Amada's mentioning of course, SMEs. 99% of industry companies in our sector, they are SMEs. So they have lack of resources, and they tend to make short-term decisions and things like this. And also they have very low, leverage, towards their buyers and their partners. And most importantly, I think I would really want to echo one point which has already made this morning by some panelists about the cost of compliance. Because, of course, one thing in China, the human cost is increasing very fast. The average wage for line work now is already 3 times compared like 10 years ago. But still, I think their new agenda are pushing towards pushing to the suppliers, like living wage agenda. I'm not saying this is not good, this is not a good thing. It's a good thing to do, but I think it needs to be done in a good way. So many initiatives, standards, brands are telling our suppliers, okay, you cannot just look at the minimum wage. You need to look at much higher at the living wage. This is something we need to work for, and you need to pay to the workers. But I really want to say this is a common challenge. It's a common goal for the whole supply chain. There needs to be some kind of commercial arrangement to reach this goal. Because normally, according to our calculation, the living wage is like 1.7 to 2.5 times of that minimum wage. So this is a greater challenge and facing everyone on the supply chain. Of course, I think we have also different other challenges. If you look at the outside China, okay, we are investing a lot in our neighboring countries, in ASEAN countries, in Cambodia, Vietnam, everywhere. According to our estimation, we employ somewhere between 2 to 5 million workers in this region, Chinese university companies, and most of them are women. And for instance, in Vietnam, 90% women. So I think the challenge in China only gets bigger when they go outside China. But still, I think this needs to be tackled from a very systematic perspective. So I would really want to say that the challenge is only getting more complicated and bigger. So before, we only need to look at the Chinese workers in Chinese factories in China. Now we have to take care of Chinese workers in foreign invested factories in China, but also local workers in Chinese invested factories outside China and Chinese workers in Chinese invested factories outside China.
Okay.
So I hope you can follow me. So this is a big group and a lot of new challenges, and I really want to learn from you and and also of course we are doing a lot of things to solve these challenges. I think that's what I want to share for now.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So we'll go ahead and hear from Ms. Atapan with regards to the challenges here in Thailand.
First of all, thank you to invite us. Well, for Thai tuna, as you may, some of you may know that, well, it's a very high incentive for the labor. We use about, just only for tuna, 70,000 people, and 80% the same, women. Okay? And for this kind of work, well, unfortunately, we cannot have the equipment, high technology to replace the workers because we use hand to peel off the skin of fish. So this is, the worker has to hand carry the piece by piece by hand. So it cannot replaced by any machine. So this is the very most challenge for our business. The 70,000 people, just only tuna, not including all other seafood sector. Yeah. So, and 80% are migrant worker from Myanmar, from Cambodia, or Laos. So we call it at 3D works, Thai people. We cannot find Thai people for this kind of job. Yeah. So you may know 3D. Dirty, dangerous, difficulty.
Dangerous,
Yeah.
difficult.
So this is our most challenge. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Atapan. Mr. Francis, let's hear from the labor union side.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for me to join this panel. Let's start, sorry, to look into the labor market in Asia Pacific. There are 1 billion workers. It's half of the working people in Asia Pacific are in vulnerable employment. And informality in Asia is growing, including non-conventional informal sector, like a gig economy. And still there are 400 million workers are living in poverty, including 170 million workers in extreme poverty. And 26 million children between 7 years old and 15, they are in labor, child labor. And the Asia Pacific has the largest number of the workers in the forced labor. So we have great, and we have a serious deficit in this in Asia Pacific. And I cannot deny the contribution of the expanding global supply chains, expanding global supply chains contribution to employment creation. But in terms of quality of employment, that's actually the main problem and issue. We have, as of 2015, in Asia, there are more than 900 export processing zones with employment of the 55 million workers. But when you look at the situation in export processing zones, there's normally total ban of unionization, and they deny the access of the union leader to the workplaces. There is a clear limitation on collective bargainings, collective action, and freedom of association. And they have inadequate protection for the discrimination practices. So yes, it has been creating jobs, but in terms of the quality of jobs, they fail to create, even they worsen the situation. And ITUC found that up to 94% of the workers in global supply chains are hidden labor. They are, their employment is outsourced, so that the leading corporate responsibility is also outsourced to the layer of contractors. And according to the ILO, the global supply chain participation can contribute to the productivity gain, but it cannot translate into the social and the labor gain because it doesn't contribute to any increase in wages and working conditions. So yes, we see the clear deficit in the global, the decent work deficit in the global supply chain. And we believe that behind of this deficit is definitely the persistent violation of the fundamental workers' rights. According to the ITUC Global Rights Index in 2018, in 18 Asian Pacific countries out of 25, there is no guarantee of the workers' right, or there is a systematic violation of rights. So it is the fundamental problem we face in Asia Pacific to create the decent work in the global supply chain. And also the social protection, according to the ILO, more than 60% of the Asian Pacific population, they have no access to any social protection. And also we have been facing serious social infrastructure deficit. We need to change our view because investment in social protection and social infrastructure is actually the increasing productivity in the labor market. And the last but not least, in Asia Pacific, we don't have, as Sarah already mentioned, we don't have a strong institution for social dialogue, which is the most powerful and democratic institution to reach the consensus, to push forward our policy to create decent work.
All right. Thank you, Francis. So amidst all these challenges, which I'm sure when we open the floor for everybody to also share perhaps their comments and questions to the panel, amidst all these challenges in different contexts, large enterprises, small and medium enterprises in the domestic side and international side, like Xiaohui had mentioned, how do we actually get this message across? And you also, because you also mentioned the word opportunity, there is an opportunity behind providing decent work for the employees. So how do we communicate or send this message across to enterprises that providing decent work or incorporating responsible labor practices can be a solution, can be an opportunity to address labor-related challenges? And if you have a number of examples from your experience that has been very good with respect to making enterprises look at decent work as a solution that can bring opportunities, then I think everybody would also want to hear about that. So let's start from the other end, Francis, if you can. In your work with the enterprises as a union organization, what have you seen as an opportunity?
But can I just begin with emphasizing that at the 16th Asia and Pacific Regional Meeting of the ILO in 2016, governments, businesses, and trade unions, they identified the decent work deficit in global supply chain as one of the major challenges in the region.
Yes.
And then they made a strong tripartite commitment as stipulated in the Bali Declaration to building and strengthening labor market institutions, enabling the realization of decent work for all, including addressing decent work deficit in global supply chains. So I believe in Asia Pacific region, we already made a strong political high-level commitment.
Okay.
So we need to make this commitment into action. So
Have you had any experience with some companies actually translating this commitment into action?
the company level, we rather work actually in very negative cases. Sorry. So for example, the companies quite laid off the workers, and you see the case in Cambodia on the minimum wage. So there's a quite large number of cases, quite worse cases on the global supply chains. But at the same time, I believe that there, of course, it's the challenges, but at the same time, I believe it's an opportunity for the trade union to engage with the social partners. And then that's why we, ITUC Asia Pacific, we encourage our affiliate to have a dialogue with their social partners and business and government. If the government is not very cooperative, we just ask our trade union to talk with the business. Of course, it takes time, but that's worth trying to have this social dialogue and constructive industrial relations. That's why last December, the ITUC APV had a joint meeting, the regional dialogue with the cooperation of the Asia Pacific employers on the future of work, which is also one of the social dialogue. So I cannot give the one specific case, but in Asia Pacific, yes, we have a great problems in the decent work issue, but at the same time, we try to build this social dialogue and constructive industrial relations at all levels, the regional and the national and also enterprise level.
And that's why it's very important for that freedom of association.
Definitely, because the social dialogue is only, the genuine and constructive social dialogue is only based on the full respect for the fundamental workers' right. And please think that the social dialogue is not for the compromising. It's actually the for win-win situation.
Right. Ms. Atapan? Any good examples from the Thai Tuna Association with regards to how you can convince or send that message across to the companies that providing decent work can be an opportunity and not necessarily just an additional cost?
Okay, I would like to share like this. Well, according to Thai law, we have what we call welfare committee. Okay, in the past, we never thinking of let any migrant worker to be the committee. So then we contact with the NGO for Myanmar side. Then those in Mahachai, because mostly our factory in Mahachai. Okay, so and then we have a social dialogue with them and let them come to help us. Because when you use people with their own native language, so they will trust them much more than when we talk to them. Okay, then we convince our members to set the welfare committee by let those migrants to be the committee, and they have the election by themselves, non-discriminate, fairly treat between Thai, Myanmar or Cambodia. So this is what, according to our experience. And we can confirm right now, all the members, they have this kind of committee at their factories. Yeah.
All right.
And next step, we think that we plan to make it more better, to be more efficient for this, for those workers to voice to the employer.
Right.
Yeah, through this welfare committee mechanism.
And did you see a change with regards to the workers?
Yes, a lot of change in the factory. Yeah, because people, the workers, the migrants, they're there to talk to the supervisor discuss and give comments. Yeah,
On how to improve the work.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Atika. Xiaohui,
Uh,
you were talking about opportunities earlier.
I think, according to my observation, I think I can give recommendations or solutions at three levels. That the first level will be the macro level, the bigger one, the greater one. I think one of the most important things is to let the labor market has competition. This is competition. This is very critical. If you look at the pathway of China, 15 years ago we have very very bad records regarding health and safety at workplace, discrimination, all this stuff. But now I think domestically these issues have been solved mainly by market development, by the proliferation of factories. So let me tell you a very interesting case. Of course, this is my personal experience. About 12 years ago, I was visiting factories in in South China, and I saw labor advertisement everywhere with all discriminative clauses. No men. If you are over 25, you are dead. And if you are from Henan province or Gansu province, okay, no need. So it's clearly written on the advertisement because at that time there we have a labor surplus. So if combined with loose regulation, everything could happen. But now I think we have a labor shortage comparatively, okay, labor shortage. So this has changed the situation dramatically. For instance, a year ago, I went to Guangdong area, and I saw the labor advertisement again. It's full of all benefits, what they can offer, what kind of wages they give. And one very impressive one advertisement I saw, they only said 5 Chinese characters. Okay, we want workers, and the requirement would be 5 Chinese characters. I translate that into English, as long as you can work. Well, it's true that I took that picture. So so you can see how the market, the labor market, the change of labor market has solved the many big issues like discrimination. Yeah. And at the medium level, I think it's very important to really implement, what has been mentioned millions of times by many people, supply chain collaboration. We have to think about, very concrete projects, steps that can, create, real impact. So, for instance, I would like to use 2 examples that we are now doing to say this is also possible and workable and also can bring actual impacts. So, for instance, several years ago, we started this multi-stakeholder advisory committee with a group of standards and initiatives, including RAP, SA1000, BICI. They are very influential in this area and also in the sector. So the main purpose of this committee is to discuss how we can unify the rules on the ground so that we can actually reduce the burden of auditing. Okay, you don't really need to adjust to different standards with very little or minor changes every time. So I think this is our vision, and we are working towards this goal. And I think this is very much welcome by suppliers. Although we may not be able to reduce the time, the rounds of audit, but for suppliers, they don't need to change anything to all these participating standards. Yeah. And another thing we are working now is to support the workers and support the factories and give them added value. We are going to very soon to launch an initiative which we call family-friendly factories, FFF. So which is actually to support women workers and also young workers and their family with a package that is working on from the ground floor from the factories. so that this can benefit not just the women workers and their children, and also the factories. Because how to retain the women workers is a challenge for the workers, for the factories. So if we can entertain them, they will stay, they will leave, they will work for the factories. So this is I think this is very largely needed by also by our factories. And lastly, at the micro level, I think it's very important to build capacities of the managers and also business owners. So that's why we are now offering training sessions on many different and difficult topics to our factories around the globe. So we have training sessions in Myanmar, in Cambodia, and in Bangladesh about women workers, about trade unions, about legal compliance. So these are the things they think, and the factories think they are facing as a challenge. If you provide solutions, I think they will be very happy to that to receive it. So, for instance, last year we offered this training to companies in Myanmar. We only had 40 seats, and we said in on the advertisement we can only have 40 seats, and if you so that please come to us as soon as possible. And in a week, we had over 100 registered participants. And that's why we had to do that again in the end of the year. So that's, I think that's why what I'm saying, it's very important to fund the challenges and offer the solutions. And that solution must be a solution that can offer also added value. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Miwa?
Yes, I can point out three opportunities. One is accessibility to new markets, and the second one is, as I already mentioned, the increase of productivity, and also the strengthening the capacity on local suppliers and workers as well. The first thing is accessibility to the market itself, and as everyone knows that we are going to host Tokyo Olympic Games next year, 2020, and the organizing committee established and operating the so-called Sustainable Sourcing Code that requires suppliers and licensees to respect human rights and also the labor standards, and also comply with fair business practice. So this is really a new, case for public organization to establish this kind of code, and it's gonna be it's already be a good opportunity for Japanese business to get to know the sourcing code, and also the committee entered into MOU with ILO concerning the promotion of decent work. So this is really, a prime time for Japanese business as a whole to, of course, we have already known about what is decent work, but it's, strength, and also to promote more among Japanese business regarding the decent work. And also, the second one is, so what I wanted to say is, if we want to, supply goods and service to the committee itself, you have to get through the human rights and labor standards already. So that will increase your accessibility to that kind of market. So public procurement is one of the way. And the second one is the increase of productivity. I can hear from my friend, a Japanese company which is called Fuji Xerox, which has many factories all over the world, and also one in many in China. And she told me one case. They set up a sort of hotline for workers, not directly to the manager, but to the external organization to raise workers' voice. So that works really well, and then that also decreased the percentage or the frequency of suspension of operation incurred by the sort of grief from workers. So that will ultimately increase the productivity itself. And another one is strengthening the capacity of local suppliers and workers, I can draw the example from Mizuno, that is also the one of the big apparel sportswear company, and not only conducting a corporate social responsibility audit, but also they provide, as already mentioned, that they provide a capacity building workshop for local suppliers and workers as well. So they say that if we want to have a long-term relationship, and if you really want to have for the business, they are not only workers, but they are going to be a market where the people are living, and also, the workers are going to be the consumers, and so in that sense, strengthening and promoting the capacity on the local suppliers and workers will ultimately turn out to a really, really good
More market
outcome.
opportunities.
Yes, right.
Right. Sarah, with regards to policy, what can we do?
We can actually do a lot. We cannot solve everything. We need all actors, but there's definitely things we can do. And I would like to focus on actually 4 elements. So first, maybe just to also come back to what Francis mentioned, we need political commitments. And we have that at the international level. For example, as a result of the International Labour Conference in 2016, there's also been discussion in the G7 and in the G20, and the EU has been very supportive of talking about these issues in that context. And at the EU level, this is something which has been put very high on the EU agenda. For instance, I can mention the Trade for All communication, which is our trade strategy, which was published in 2015, which really integrates decent work aspects and responsible supply chains issues to the EU trade policy. And it's been really reinforced in that context. More recently also, this is something we have embedded in the reflection on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's been a paper which has been published this year on that. And of course, then we need to translate this political commitment into the different EU policies and the different initiatives. And I have my colleague in the room, Alexandra Koshova, who brilliantly put together an overview of all the EU activities in this regard. It's online, it's a very long document, so don't hesitate to go through it and have a look, because we're doing a lot. In terms of the concrete example, I would like to mention the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which is our legislation on reporting by companies. And companies now in the EU, the large one, it covers around 6,000 companies, have to report on labor rights issues, human rights, environmental issues, including on due diligence aspects. So actually, if a company wants to do business in the EU or with EU companies, then having a very good record on integrating decent work in their activities is really going to facilitate business. So that's the first thing that I would like to highlight. The second element, which is another example of how we have mainstreamed this through different internal and external policies, is that we have integrated and reinforced our provisions in our trade agreements on respect for fundamental labor rights, as well as the promotion of responsible business conduct with a reference to all the different standards that I mentioned earlier. And this is something which is quite innovative, and we're using the leverage and the convening power of our trade agreements to promote these issues when the implementation phase comes. And I would like to mention that we have a number of trade agreements with Asian trading partners, which just came into force, or which are coming into force very soon, one of them being the EU-Japan trade agreement. And so it's going to bring some visibility to decent work and responsible business conduct issues, and also provide a lot of opportunities for cooperation. And we have some examples already that we have been implementing in, for instance, the EU Central America trade agreements, and working with international organizations. So those are two very concrete examples, and we have also labor dialogues, for instance, with Thailand, and we are also getting very good progress on that front with the ratification of the ILO Working Fishing Convention. This is something we very much welcome. And last but not least, we have been really working on fostering collective solutions and partnerships. And there are a lot of also very good private initiatives, and I can mention, for example, the Bangladesh Accord, which is a very good example of cooperation between the private sector and trade unions. But if we look at what we're doing also within the EU, and we have been working very closely with the ILO and the OECD, and we're also expanding this cooperation to other sides of the UN. And we have developed this Responsible Supply Chains in Asia project together with 6 trading partners in Asia, including Japan and Thailand, China as well, Philippines and Myanmar, and Vietnam, not to forget anybody. And so this project aims, first of all, at reinforcing policy coherence and creating some advocacy on the international standards which are out there. It's not about the EU putting forward its approach, but pushing towards coherence at the international level, and also to contribute to business having a better understanding of what corporate social responsibility or responsible business conduct means, and what are these standards about. And so this project really is already starting to bring results. It's the first time that the 3 organizations cooperate so closely together. And we are developing research, training, the collection of good practices, and a number of tools. We are also supporting this forum in that context. So this is something we see as very positive, and that we want to continue with that approach. We have developed a very similar project, also integrating the UN guiding principles in Central America and the development of the national action plans. So that's also another example how we can come together and promote decent working conditions in supply chains and break silos.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. So there's a lot of things that are being done, but obviously there's still a lot more to be done. So let's go ahead and open the floor for questions or comments. If you want to share any of those good practices as well, then now is the time to do so. So let's go ahead and start with the gentleman over there. Please introduce yourself.
Myself, Rajendra Acharya from UNI Global Union, which is the Global Trade Union Federation for the Private Services. I just wanted to supplement what my friend Francis has already said, especially on the moderator's question that do you have any examples? We do have many examples in a global context. I should say few examples for the Asia-Pacific context. To start with OECD, we have a case in Bangladesh, which is a company you might be knowing in Bangladesh that is called Banglalink, which is a telecommunication company. We have an ongoing case with the Dutch NCP. Similarly, we had another case with Telenor, the Norwegian telecommunication company. We didn't go for OECD because the NCP to the complaint, but what we did is we had a framework agreement with Telenor. We settled the issue now in Bangladesh after 7 years. But it took 7 years to settle that case in Bangladesh. We spent nearly 3 years to settle with Telenor in Malaysia. We haven't done in Thailand. They are operating here also, DTAC, which is Telenor company. We have a union there. Where is the union? We don't know, because it has been somewhere. We have to dig in and we have to find out. So that is what we have an example with the multinational company. Similarly, there is another company called IKEA, which is a Swedish company. You must have IKEA in everyone's house there, which is furniture company. We have an OECD case just filed in, again with the Dutch NCP, though it is not Asia-Pacific issue, there are countries related to this. We have been doing this with UFCW, United Federation of Commercial Workers of USA, putting case into the Portugal, Ireland, and there are Asia-Pacific countries are also coming up into this. So that is on the OECD side. Coming to the UNGP issue, we have a big issue with the world athletes that we represent, the sport professionals. We have an issue with the world athletes, and there has been a good progress on that. The world athletes had negotiated with the various sport governing bodies. It could be FIFA or NBA, there are many. So that is also another good example that we have done. The third one is on, again in Bangladesh, on Accord. You have also, I mean, from the panelists also, you have also come up with Global Union, together with Industrial. We are the signatory of the Bangladesh Accord. And we have done, there were 2 companies that we filed the case, and we got that done. So the compensation was given by those companies. So on Bangladesh case. Though it's not directly connected to this one, because we are from the Global Union, so I must talk about Global Framework Agreement as well. So that is also another instrument, together with due diligence, OECD, ILO multinational guidelines, and everything. We put these issues into our Global Framework Agreement. We have one classic example. Recently, we negotiated with Société Générale, which is a French company, the Banking Financial Institute. What we put the word, let me read the word. UNI will be consulted on the duty of vigilance plan as part of the measures implemented to identify and prevent serious breaches in respect of human rights, in order to propose those appropriate remedies when breaches have been observed. So this sort of wordings we have been able to put into our Global Framework Agreement with global companies. So this is how these things are progressing. So, but in the Asia-Pacific region, we have a lot more issues. There are many companies violating, even having GFA signed, they are not agreeing to freedom of association or collective bargaining. I can give you example of G4S. We have global agreement with the security company G4S. A lot of issues in many countries. We have ISS, the cleaning company. We have agreement with them, but it is still in the process. So I just thought I should put it into as a supplement. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for that. Any other questions that we have from the floor, or any comments for our panel? Yes, sir?
Thank you very much for your good presentation. My name is Adachi from the Japan Research Institute, and I have been dealing with socially responsible investment community for 20 years. And according to today's discussion, I would like to emphasize the role of financial sector. Maybe, as you know, financial sector can decide whether which conduct is good or not. So I am very interested in the current development of EU of sustainable finance regulation. So I am very, very interested in the situation of developing taxonomy, which can distinguish the sound economic activities and non-sound economic activities for sustainability. So I would like to ask Sarah regarding the EU policy on sustainable finance, especially in the aspect of human rights issues.
Sarah? Comments on sustainable finance and how it can facilitate with regards to decent work and...
Yes, so that's an issue which is actually included in the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan, and which has gained a lot of visibility. And there is, as you rightly mentioned, this integration of sustainability aspects in the taxonomy directive. And there is also a study which is being conducted on due diligence in that context. So that was an outcome of the Sustainable Finance Action Plan. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert that I can really provide you with all the details on the taxonomy. I would invite you to consult the overview of all the activities, because there is a full chapter on that, and I'm also happy to put you in touch with colleagues working on this issue.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions or any challenges that you may think of? Yes, sir.
This is Kaji Riazul Haq, Chairman, National Human Rights Commission, Bangladesh. I was just interested to know about an issue that one of our panelists was mentioning that in the export processing zone, the industries in the export processing zone, you are mentioning that there is no right for bargaining of the workers. So, do you have any assessment? But at the same time, it is also right that these export processing industries are contributing a lot to the nation, particular nation. So, do you have any statistics or data like that, that this export processing industries, what sort of human rights are being violated in those industries, and the industries who are beyond the export processing zone have the rights to labor union rights and everything is there, and what is the percent, what is the ratio of violation of human rights in those two places? That's a simple question.
Francis?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I'm not in charge of this the export processing zones, but yes, we ITUCAP we have a study as far as I know, and definitely I'm going to share it with you. So after the session, yeah, please share your contact detail, and yeah, and
All right. Any other questions? But that's interesting, Francis, with regards to that issue that this gentleman has mentioned with regards to those limitations in export processing zones, and what is actually being done with the unions on.
there are two ways of campaigning and advocacy work. First is extending the application of the national law to the EPJs. That's the one way. And the second, and the other way is to actually, even though it's very difficult to access to the workplaces in EPJs, but we try to contact the workers there and try to organize workers union there. So there's two ways. The legal way, we need to expand the application of the national law, and second, we try to organize workers in EPJs.
And
So
how successful have you been?
we have unions there. Yeah, we successfully organize unions, but still there are limitations, as I mentioned, in terms of the practicing their rights. But still, we are working, and then also we try, as our colleague from the union already mentioned, we try to have more the cross-border social dialogue and the collective bargaining, including the global, international, and regional framework agreement. So far, as long as I know, there are 130 multinational enterprises to sign this international framework agreement.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Yes, go ahead, Miwa.
Yeah, regarding the global framework agreement, I forgot to mention that Mizuno is one of the major Japanese companies which entered the agreement. And speaking about export processing zone, from the investors, let's say the Japanese investor side, we got the two different messages from the hosting
The host country.
host
Yes.
countries. One is from Ministry of Labor, another one is perhaps the Ministry of Commerce or something, which give a sort of incentive to investors to come to the export processing zone and all the things. So for the business side, need to be very, very self-disciplined. I mean, we are not exempt from the ILO standard, even though we are operating in a export processing zone. But of course, also we need to deal with the local government, host government. So I can see quite a confusion among the business side to get the really, which one is the right message and what we should do. So.
All right. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, sir.
It's not a question, but a kind of a commentation or kind of follow-up to Dr. Liang Xiaohui and other participants' voice. 2 days ago, at the Anatara Hotel, Professor Suya Deva, he gave a suggestion about ABC to the business human rights. He said the A is for the awareness raising, B is for the capacity building, and the C is for the collaboration. So more different stakeholders to work together. Here I threw out another version of ABC to the decent work in global supply chain. My name is Zhang Wanhong from Wuhan University, China. So that's mainly from my own experience with China's context. For the A, I will say the anti-discrimination. For the decent work, most of my colleagues, they understand the decent work. But I will say that good payment is not enough. Even you can, we have a kind of shortage of labor force, and you can get you have minimum wage or kind of living wage, and you can pay. Your payment is no problem, but the working in the place, they're still kind of segregated. For the managers and the factory owners, they still discriminate the HIV/AIDS for the or hepatitis B, those kind of different diseases, or this kind of or if they run a factory in Africa or in other countries, they still discriminate the colored people. That's not acceptable. I think that anti-discrimination is very crucial in terms of decent work. It's a pity that in Chinese law, in the Chinese legal system, we do not have a clear definition about what's discrimination in the workplace. So that's we still have a long way to go, I think, that for anti-discrimination. For B, I would say the bottom up. In our culture, a lot of people that tend to rely on the central government or the legislators to publish a law. Everything changed. But I want to emphasize the empowerment or education of the kind of the workers of the grassroots levels. Let them to they can name their rights, then claim their rights. They can. That's my point. The C, I will say, for the communication. To be frank, some of my friends, when I talk to them, I do the interview, I do the field work in Myanmar and other countries, I say, those factory owners, they are not necessarily evil. They want to do things well, but given their background, given their kind of culture, their education, they don't know, for example, they don't know what's a free trade union. They don't know how to communicate with local NGOs. Because in the language in Chinese, NGO sometimes means anti-government, non-government means anti-government. So that's kind of misunderstanding. They do not familiar with the idea of the CSOs. How could you expect them to understand or to communicate? So on one hand, we need to, create them. On the other hand, we need to maybe help them. That's I call that kind of a carrot and a baton. We need to do that in two ways. Help them to communicate with the host countries' CSO or the NGOs. That we can maybe, by this chance, I would say, let's work together to promote that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Xiaohui, would you comment on that? The ABC's anti-discrimination bottom-up communication. Do you think that's something that also works well?
I think that's an excellent diagram and also a very interesting strategy. I learned that, and I'm gonna use that also in my work, of course. ABC, yeah. Maybe in the future we can also create another XYZ anyway. But this is really a good way of promoting decent work. Of course, discrimination and communication and also the mobilization, assembly, association of workers. These are the bottom lines and also most important thing for the decent work agenda. And I especially want to emphasize in the overseas investment situation, this is more important. For instance, right, because most Chinese investors, they didn't have any experience dealing with trade unions, free trade unions in China before they, step out of the out of China. So after they were starting business in other countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, they feel the real pressure of real trade unions, and then that creates a challenge for them. I think it's very important for them to know this, to learn this, and also know that this is the bottom-up schedule, or bottom-up way of, workers in these countries. Although they need to learn from them, they also need to communicate with these trade unions. So this is also what we are teaching to our investors. We have to be very clear that this is a reality you have to handle, you have to live up to, and also you need to learn new skills, to tackle this. So I think this ABC scheme would work, and I would really want to promote that. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiaohui. Other questions from the floor that we have? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Pranom Sumwong. I work with Human Rights Defender with Protection International. We see the worker who demanding for their rights as human rights defender. We know the living wages is a key to decent work. I'd like to get the comment from panelists about how we make corporation be able to have political will to pay living wages for the worker. Number two, can anyone comment about the cases of the Suzuki worker? In Thailand, they faced the union busing 6 years ago. Supreme Court finally ordered that there are some discrimination and union busing, dismissal, unfair dismissal to the leader of the union, but the NCP of the Japan are not yet taking the case with the company in Japan. So if you can comment on that, thank you.
All right. So maybe we can start with the question on Suzuki workers here in Thailand. Ms. Atapan, Miwa, do you have any comments on it?
Sorry, I did not expect that kind of questions, so I'm sorry. I'm sure that I have to be prepared for that question, but I have to admit that I'm not. So I'm not in a position to, explain the position of our national contact point. So, but what I can say is there are still lots of things that our national contact point should be improved in order to open to hear the voices from, outside Japan. And so I'm sorry that I can't really properly comment on it. So, but I'd like to talk more and then to know the situation and get the situation, improve the situation. Thank you. Sorry.
All right. Francis, would you have any insight coming from the union?
Maybe very brief, short answer to your question about the living wage living wage issue. One of the main activity to promote the decent work in global supply chain is to have a regional wage campaign. ITUC, we have campaign in Latin America and Africa and Asia. The Asia we call is a +50 wage floor campaign. And then we just try to increase the wage level to the living wage at the same the in very coordinated way among our national affiliates in ASEAN countries.
Ms. Atapan, anything about the living wage?
For living wage, I don't have any comment at this moment. But before we going to discuss more about the living wage, I would like to tell the story about the migrant workers. As I told that, most of them are Myanmar. They come to Thailand, they work with us, and they send back the money back home, can build the house for their parents. And if you look at the rooms that they live in, they have with the many karaoke. They have a party mostly every weekend, something like that. So before we thinking of the living wage for those people, I think that we also have to study about this too. If you interview people from Myanmar, how much money that they send back home, and you will surprise that.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of the issues on living wage has to also deal with the complexity around what is that definition on living wage, especially like Ms. Ataban was talking about the migrant workers, that they have a different idea of what the living wage is as opposed to the local employees as well. Xiaohui, anything on the living wage?
I think I already mentioned one point, which is living wage is a global supply chain commitment. It cannot just be pushed into suppliers. That's one point I already made. But also, I think living wage should also be promoted or implemented at a larger geographical level, not just in one country or in one region, because it will create, different competitive advantages or disadvantages from that. So I really think it's very right time for international institutions to really make a universal definition and standards regarding living wage. Otherwise, it's still a voluntary approach, and it's implemented very fragmentedly, and I don't think this is a fair agenda. Thank you.
All right. Yes, Francis.
I think already the ILO definition on minimum wage is also including living wage concept there, because it's for the life with the dignity for workers and their families. So I do not see any problem for the migrant worker to send back the money to their family support. Yeah, and also in regard to this living wage issue, I would like to emphasize this the future of work report. There's the reinvigoration of the social contract by the global labor guarantee, including this minimum living wage and occupational health and safety and working hour in line with the fundamental workers' right. This is very important, I think, a development within the ILO, and I expect greatly some high-level political commitment to implement this global union guarantee, which is, I think, very vital in promoting decent work in the global supply chains.
Right. Miwa, you mentioned already something about productivity, and that could potentially also be something that would be connected with living wages, don't you think?
I just wanted to mention that the investors or business tend to think that seeking just a cheap labor when, let's say, the Japanese or Chinese companies go outside, but not seeking a cheap labor, but also maybe we're exploring a new market. So thinking about the people's life, they are going to be future clients. So
Right.
yeah,
right.
we need to change our mindset.
So it somehow benefits the companies as well to lift that wage up, because then they can have the means to afford
Yeah, right.
the products of the Japanese companies as well.
Yeah, thank you for complimenting.
So there's that opportunity. Yes, ma'am. And then we'll go ahead and have that question from the back as well.
Like this, yeah. Just a small comment on the living wage, because I think there's one very important step that everybody's that a lot of the time, or let's talk about the EAT bonuses that, you know, there's always every year there's this fight about that the producers are not paying their EAT bonuses in time, or talk about benefits and all of that. So I think there's like one giant step that we have to take first in order to get even. Just a comment I wanted to make.
All right. Yes, Sarah, comment on that.
No, maybe just a quick comment on this issue. I think it's also very important to put some emphasis actually on the link between living wage and actually collective bargaining and freedom of association, because it is through, I mean, as Francis, you mentioned, that through collective bargaining and allowing freedom of association that then it will be for the workers and the employers through social dialogue to define what is in the living wage for them. And I agree there is no question on the definition, but then to agree on this amount. And there is still a lot of progress to do on that front. And the other element also, I think this is also linked to purchasing practices of the suppliers. And there is also a number of discussions and progress in this regard, still some work to do. And I think that's also very relevant so when we talk about certain industries or supply chains, for instance, also the situation in Bangladesh, that there is also this dimension, and that is not just about pricing or the amount of the salary, but that there is a number of elements which have to be taken into account. So I fully agree with you.
As well. All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. We have a question in the back.
Hi, my name is Kamini. I'm from the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. I have a question with regards to living wage as well. Mr. Liang, you mentioned just now that it cannot be, the living wage burden cannot just be placed on the suppliers. And I completely agree with that, because I think this is an industry initiative. Any insights from anyone on the panel on how do we see this responsibility being shared across the entire supply chain?
Anybody on the panel who wants to take a stab on that question? How can this responsibility be shared?
Yeah,
of,
that's right.
Trying to provide living wage across all the stakeholders, not just the companies, perhaps, in terms of the employees as well, the unions, government.
I think already Sarah mentioned, I mean, you just echo, you know, when we have a clear, the workers can, not only workers, also employer, if we can have a collective bargaining based on strong representation, I think we can solve this issue, isn't it? We can reach certain consensus and agreement on the wage level, which based on the mutual understanding. Of course, we developed, as ILO did in your convention on the minimum wage setting mechanism. So we just provide some certain definition with the elements for them to take into consideration. But actually, eventually what we want to see is, as Sarah mentioned, we need to have the freedom of association and then collective bargaining.
Right. And I think the conversations around wages for the enterprises, because when I'm in the classroom with my managers, they always talk about, well, you know, this is the minimum wage. And really, when they're talking about it, it's really about labor cost and not really labor wage. And so they're really confusing those two terms, where the wages does not necessarily take into account the productivity. Because if you have very productive workers, then your labor cost, even though you're paying high labor wages, would actually go low. And that's really where we want the companies to go is that in order for you to get them to be productive, you have to set a wage, right? Where they're not really, wondering how am I going to feed my family and send my 2 children to school with this kind of salary, right? Because once that particular need is addressed, then they will think about how they can actually do better in their work and become really productive. And that is where their value to the company is going to come from. And that's where having lower labor costs will become a competitive advantage for a company in terms of leveraging their human capital with their employees. So having motivated and really productive employees, part of that is the wages, and part of that is providing the training like Xiao Hoi was mentioning, and also providing those benefits that actually get the employees to be more committed. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So with respect to global supply chains, there's a very unfortunate side of this, that is involvement of child labor or forced labor. I come from India, where this is a huge issue, specifically focusing on rural areas or low-income families. So, and this is just not an issue in Asia, but all over the world. And these issues might be overlooked or happen in such hidden societies that these are not directly linked to companies. So, open to anyone, just what are your comments about the negligence towards these issues, specifically in Asia with the new trends or practical tools which were discussed earlier in the panel? Thank you very much.
All right. So anything on child labor, right? Forced labor. And is there anything that can be done with regards to how we manage the global supply chains to try to address that particular issue? Ms. Atapan, please.
Yeah, for child labor, fortunately, we do not have child labor, and we also do not have forced labor. Well, you may know from the new law that our Thai royal government issued, and the penalty is very high. So, and I forgot to tell your guy about when people is going to be our members, the association. We are very strict. As Sarah said, that commitment is very important. So we asked the CEO of the company to sign the commitment letter to the association that will follow no child labor, no forced labor, no discrimination, and have to take good care, health and safety to the workers, and also about the wages, paying wages correctly, and also give benefit to the workers.
Right.
So this is what we have done, the first thing when they apply to our members.
Right.
Sorry, Kim, I would like to, I'm talking about, try to share that those migrants send back home money, that's good. What I'm going to show to you all is not just money that they gain, not just for themselves. It's some kind of like living wage or not, that's all. Because they have ability to send back home a big money, yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So in terms of child labor, I think what Ms. Atapan is also saying is that there's a commitment at the national level, but at the same time, as an association, they also try to get that commitment from the company as well. So we may have time for one last question, or no? She's saying no, we don't have time. Well, one last? Can we have one last? Real quick. Yes, sir.
So, I just want to make my opinion regarding child labor, what told by our Thai representative here. So, in the formal sector, it's right that there is no child labor in many countries. But if you look at the informal sectors, there is no CO. There is nothing like that. What is the scenario? So, if you want to make the country, what my Indian friends mentioned, if you want to make the country free from child labor, you will have to make the country free from child labor from both the sectors, mainly from the informal sectors, which unfortunately it's not there. So what sort of initiatives can be taken to remove the child labor from the informal sectors too? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody on the panel, as well as to everybody here who've been very participative, and hopefully that can give you some insights on how we can all contribute towards uplifting the plight of employees with having a decent workplace environment. Thank you very much.
Huge round of applause to our speakers. Thank you, everyone. So this was our last session of the day, and a few reminders before we head out. Firstly, if you're attending the 2 receptions, embassy receptions, please meet downstairs by the escalators on the ground floor. There will be 2 different buses, one for the Swedish embassy, another one for the Australian embassy. Be sure to hop on the right bus. Secondly, tomorrow morning we have 2 breakfast sessions happening at 7:30. One is Business and Human Rights, focusing on the rights holders. It's at the public foyer. And the other one is Responsible Business Conduct in the Mining Sector in CR4. They start at 7:30. The plenary session starts at 8:30. So if you're interested in coming for the breakfast sessions, be here at 7:30. See you tomorrow. Good evening, everyone.
Test 1 2 testing 1 2 1 2
ลิฟต์เปิดค้างไว้เลยก็ได้ครับ
testing 1 2 1 2
ลิฟต์ครับลิฟต์ครับเปิดค้างไว้เลยก็ได้แป๊บนึง
testing Testing, testing, 1 2 1 2. Test 1 2.